Hello everyone, and welcome back to day 4 of Real Estate Live UK and our second week of virtual events following our first event in June. This event is brought to you by White Label and our partners, and this specific panel is being sponsored by Ealing and London, and we're really excited to hear the discussion that's going to unfold in the next hour. We hope that you've been enjoying the week of events so far, and that you've been engaging and interacting with our panel and with our speakers. And to kickstart your involvement in every one of our sessions this week, we've been asking you, the audience, what is the most important factor in unlocking development and ensuring the continued strength of UK real estate? There's a poll that's just popped up on your screen with a number of different options, so I'll give you a few minutes to answer that. And we'll be summarising the results at the end of the week and comparing them to the results to the similar question that we asked in June. So look out for the feedback on those. During this session, we have a very packed agenda with a lot of amazing speakers. So Mark, our chair, will be trying to come to some of your questions, but if we don't manage to answer them all, we will follow up with you afterwards. So please do put any questions that you have for the panel or the speakers in the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we will try and involve a lot of those in the debate over the next hour. So, as I mentioned, this panel is brought to you by Ealing in London, and we're going to be talking about culture and creativity. And to chair the discussion, I'd like to hand over to Mark Wilcher, who's the Director of Community Development for Ealing Council. Over to you, Mark, and I hope everyone enjoys the session.
Thanks, Bonnie. Good morning, everyone. I really do hope that the next hour will be both energised and informative. I think it's a really great conversation to be having, trying to link up place, neighbourhoods, communities with that of the cultural and diversity offer that we all need to be making and contributing towards. And sort of trying to start off with a bit of context, really. The Mayor of London has launched a £2.3 million culture and risk business support fund to support the culture and creative industries. We all know that coronavirus has really had an impact, and that's really affecting grassroots music venues, LGBT venues, artist workspace, independent cinemas, and the diverse range of cultural offer across the city. So given the importance of culture to the Mayor and for us locally in terms of our plans and the renewed focus of that through the cultural plan, through the neighbourhood plans that are emerging across London, in this session I really want us to think about what we need to do to build and create those vibrant communities that we all really want to both experience, live in, and support. So we've got some really great speakers with a lot more knowledge and talent in this area than I bring to the conversation. So I'll do my best to steer time and steer the conversation. But if I can start by asking our two keynotes to start off the conversation, that's Councillor Julian Bell, the leader of Ealing Council, and Jamal Edwards, who many of you will already know. And by starting to ask Julian, please, Julian, what role does culture, the arts and specialist community events have in Ealing?
Thank you, Mark, and good morning to everybody. For me, very much arts and culture are the essence of what Ealing is. When people say, "Oh, you're from Ealing," "Oh yeah, Ealing Studios," or the Ealing comedies. People know Ealing for its art and its culture. We have fantastic events every year, which sadly have been struck down by COVID this year, but we've got to get those back and make sure that we keep them going and viable. But the comedy festival, the jazz festival, the blues festival, the Hanwell Hootie, all of those fabulous events that we have, they kind of define Ealing as a place, and certainly things like the London Mailer now return to kind of its spiritual home in Southall. These are all things that for me make Ealing such a fantastic place to both visit, live and work in. Clearly we've got those cultural jewels of Gunnersbury Park and Museum, and also Pittshanger Manor, where fantastic exhibition at the moment. London places and voices with fabulous Hogarth painting, so a Rake's Progress. I went and saw it the other week. I'd really recommend it. Terrific exhibition to reopen Pitsanger after the lockdown. So, there's other things that we might talk about. Some of the street art that we have in South Acton, Artification, a fantastic community arts group. We've been working with some of the youngsters from Follow Youth Centre as well, and having them come and do things in Pitsanger Manor is what's planned. So lots of really, really positive things. But I think I've hopefully talked up how important these things are for us as a borough.
Thanks, Julian. And I think we're going to hear from some of our more local events and organisers in our later panel. So that's a really nice scene setting for Ealing. Jamal, can I come to you and ask you, what do you see the role of culture and arts and community-based activities being, and how do you think we should be using that you've heard from Julian, that a large diverse offer, but how do we make that an accessible offer? Do you want to talk through that, please?
Jamal might be on mute.
Jamal might be on mute.
Hello, sorry, hello. So I've done stuff for years in other boroughs, and always doing creative stuff, and I stopped doing that because people didn't realise I was actually from Ealing, and when I actually looked into the stuff that Ealing had on offer, I was just like, wow, for example, Julian talking about Pitsanger Manor. I went to college next door to Ealing, but I never really thought Pitsanger Manor I would need to go, and obviously I went, and I'm trying to take the kids there as well. But Ealing, from Love Box, the secret cinema stuff, the drive-in cinema. Back in the day, I remember, because I've lived in Ealing for 20 plus years. They used to have stuff like Edwards, Barracuda, Priory, which obviously got shut down. But it's I know, I was speaking to some people at Ealing at night, and they were saying they were trying to do some more sort of stuff around nightlife. And I remember I had a meeting with Paul as well around how can we increase more nightlife in Ealing. But I think from perspective of transparency with different people within Ealing, different, whether it's Acton, Hanwell, South Ealing, Southall, all the different places, is I always thought having different representatives for each area that actually connected into the community, that can feed back into how you can make Ealing much more sort of a creative hub. Because for example, the London Borough of Brent, I was oh, why is not Ealing the what is it, the culture borough?
Borough of Culture.
Yeah, Borough of Culture. And it's just I'm always thinking about how I can connect with Ealing, because people don't really, obviously now they see me as part and being part of Ealing, but before I never did. So it was just trying to figure out that. And what was your question in terms of how to make it more diverse, was you saying?
Well, so yeah, I think it would be interesting to explore what role you think the culture and the arts could have to bring the communities maybe closer together. So really interesting you started there talking about the creative hub and the link across the borough. So just maybe talk about how we can reach into those spaces using that web of links.
Yeah, so I've always thought you could connect with people via different people in the community. I know so many different people across Ealing, and I think it's just having that transparency of conversation where you are speaking to them, you're asking for feedback, but then you're acting upon it as well. I think that's so important, because I talk to people all across the borough, and I know there are those people out there. It's just bringing them into the conversation. And I think when I saw this in my inbox, I was quite happy to jump on and try and give my feedback and try and see how I can connect more with sort of the key stakeholders within the borough to sort of bring it all together. But there is that want for more and transparency, I think, is the big part here.
Thanks, Jamal, and thanks, Julian. That's a really nice, I think, scene setting and a challenge that you've put there, Jamal, for us as well as we think about place and neighbourhoods. So I'd like to just move us on then into our first panel conversation, really, which we're going to be joined by Paul Broadhurst from the GLA and Davina Benton from Countryside, who obviously bring both a strategic and a developer perspective into the conversation. And can I start with you, Davina, by asking, how can landowners and occupiers work together to use our spaces creatively, both to generate footfall, enliven our town centres, and make them inviting and livable spaces? Obviously, we've heard from Jamal there about some of the opportunities, so I'd be interested to take your perspective from Countryside's view.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So I think what's really important to say is that high streets are evolving, and in terms of attracting people to high streets, they want a lot more than just retail. They really want that cultural aspect as well. We, Countryside, are currently developing 3,500 new homes in South Acton alongside the Acton High Street. And what's really important here is that there is an established community before we started. There were 1,800 homes that we had to regenerate. And we spoke to the original community to see what's really important in terms of their culture, because it wasn't about us just creating a new development. It's about understanding what's important to them and really working with that. And from that, they said that it was very important to have the youth centre, because actually that's where a lot of the young people come together too, like Julian said, to actually create these amazing ideas for the local community. So we worked with them. And what we feel is that any form of design starts with creativity, and it's about really understanding what's important in order to form the creativity to create an amazing place. Because any development, you don't want it to be a dormitory. You want it to be a cultural hub for the surrounding area and to really benefit the town centre as well, and looking at complementary uses. So we have a community fund that both L&Q and Countryside fund. And this is for local residents to decide how they're going to use that creatively and then sponsor different events. And this really helps with the high street, because as we're next door to the high street, it draws people from our development to the high street and vice versa. But it's about also different landowners within an area working together to ensure that we are complementing each other in terms of creative ideas and not trying to be in competition. So I think that's kind of the summary of really drawing people to the high street. You need more creative events and you need everyone to work together in order for that to happen and for the residents to feel included in the decisions.
Thanks, Davina. And so picking up that need of people to work together and to collaborate, Paul, can I come to you and ask you, please, around sort of the mayor's approach and what he thinks, or what the GLA's position is in terms of trying to get arts and culture activated in towns and green spaces? I'm really conscious that the Culture Fund is about supporting businesses, but of course we need to make sure those businesses can thrive and survive beyond the sort of crisis fund that's there at the moment. So do you want to maybe think about how we can take up that challenge that Davina put down around collaboration?
Yeah, it's a big question, but I guess just to summarise where the mayor's, where at the GLA we've seen our role in relation to culture has been particularly at the grassroots end of culture. So things like the cultural rescue fund, the COVID fund that we put out, the Culture at Risk, is about protecting those things that are really falling through the cracks. Things like LGBTQ plus venues, which have dropped off a cliff in terms of numbers over the last sort of 10 or so years. Down to 51 now left in London. Things like grassroots live music venues. Ealing has such a great heritage of live music, but actually surfacing these, protecting them, promoting them, helping people like developers to see where they are. So literally mapping them, creating the cultural infrastructure map that we've put out from City Hall. All of this stuff is just getting these too long overlooked small grassroots spaces onto people's radar so that they can be protected, promoted, and really looked after. A big angle on this, of course, is high streets. High streets and town centres are the places where all of this jigsaw piece. All of the jigsaw pieces fit together. And I think we need to look at town centres and high streets as the place where we bring culture, retail, nighttime economy, all of those elements together. And of course, COVID has forced us to think about those outside spaces in a completely different way. And I think one of the things we'll take from COVID is that, and to be honest, we were thinking about this before, it's really interesting that this has forced us to move our thinking on, is how do we really use those outside spaces? The government brought in pavement licenses to really try and push al fresco dining because we know it's safer outside than inside. But there was already a will to do that because you create that festival feel, that animation, that excitement in the high street, and culture as well as hospitality plays a really important role in that. So one of the things that we did at City Hall was we ran a nighttime commission, an independent group, and they came out with a load of recommendations, which you can read in their Think Night report. It's online. I'll put the link in the chat for you. And they said, set up a nighttime enterprise zone, do a pilot, run a test to see what might be possible with a town centre. And so Waltham Forest were that test bed. They ran their pilot and we're going to publish their report very soon. And a big piece of that was getting much more activation on the high street, because we know that footfall makes the perception of safety really increase. And perception of safety was the biggest barrier that came out in that pilot project. It's the first thing you've got to tackle. And that's by getting the community working with the council and with the businesses to work out where those issues are and find out ways of dealing with them. And I think that because Waltham Forest had been the London Borough of Culture the previous year, they really understood the role of culture in community making and in economic regeneration, actually. And so culture played a big part in this nighttime enterprise zone pilot. And what they actually did was pairing local creatives, really looking locally, pairing local creatives with local venues, restaurants, cafes, businesses, the local library, putting on workshops. So it was a combination of marketing, working with the local community, working with the businesses, pairing people up. It wasn't rocket science. It didn't cost zillions. It's all very, very doable. But running some test events, getting opening hours later on the high street, getting shops staying open later, and having culture as that kind of anchor that draws all ages in. So we saw for the first time in Walthamstow, many more families coming out, many older people who weren't using the high street previously. And suddenly there was something there for them that piqued their interest. And that, I think, is the start of something quite powerful to build on, using that sort of culture and evening activity to break down those barriers about safety perceptions and really try and diversify who's using the high street and welcome more people in.
Thanks for that, Paul. Just really interesting from my perspective, some of those links that obviously I talk about in my day job, the community safety aspect, the public health links into those wider strategies, and recognizing that actually culture isn't a strategy that sits on its own. In fact, stealing our culture managers phrase, there isn't a cultural strategy, there's a strategy of cultures, recognizing the diversity of offer and the impact it has across a number of different facets of local authority, business and community well-being.
Yeah,
to be honest, it's really interesting to hear that from your perspective, from the strategic view. Yeah. Maybe if I could jump back to Jamal, please, and just say, Jamal, obviously we've heard that sort of strategic, try to make those links, the power of doing things, the infrastructure understanding, making the connections. But from your perspective, being someone who is more, let me say, grassroots, energized, working in the community, what would you like to see us do in terms of trying to build those links so it's in a more practical way?
Yeah, like I said, I stopped doing stuff in other. I used to get calls for everything and above. Like when I did the Olympic torch run, I ran in Waltham Forest. When I like London Borough, Brent, they've asked me they've got in touch to help them, and I've sort of I want to help, but I'm Ealing, and I want to push that more. And I felt like obviously I set up youth centres at the beginning, and I've got sort of the Ealing Council doesn't have money and all that sort of stuff, and I understand that. So I went and raised private finance from Wellcome Trust and Google to open up these youth centres. But I felt like I had a massive disconnect. Obviously, Julian came down to my youth club when I was a kid with his daughter, and I always remember that in Friary Park when I was like 13 or something like that. And like I chat to Rupert quite a lot now. But one of the things that I always get from the community is they see me as like a gateway in between, because I'm on stuff like this, but I'm actually in the streets as well. And I think one of the big things is like being accountable for what like to improve the relationship with the local community, being more accountable for what's going on. And actually, again, I keep saying, I'm probably gonna get people gonna get bored of me saying that transparency is so important. Like I even had one of my friends who I went Bury Junior School with on South Acton saying that her mum couldn't, she's the last in the block and all this sort of stuff. And it made me think, wow, like obviously she messaged me last week saying she's getting it sorted now, but like why is that happening in South Acton? There's other stuff like the old men's working club that had like 148 years or something like that within the community. Now it's been taken out. It's like little things like that just with the community just lowers their sort of belief in property developers and the council. But I'm always the one that's like, nah man, like come on, do you know what I'm saying? Because I'm like on both sides, because I see the pros and the cons. But to improve the relationship, as you say, I think definitely need much more of open dialogue with the community. And I've seen like different stuff where you've had community forums, and I think that's important. I'm in West Acton now, and I remember there was a big thing around Samurai and the tennis courts and the tennis clubs, and I find it interesting. I went to the meeting, but everyone was of older age, like there was no like young people there. And I think having awareness around these things, young people do want to be heard, and I definitely can get young people on board, and I'm more than happy to connect those dots. But yeah, I feel like you need to have more connections within the community, definitely from a grassroots level.
Then we'll certainly try to, I'm talking locally here, we'll certainly try and pick that up. But it's really useful reflection that actually what I'm hearing in that conversation is there is a slight disconnect between strategic thinking and then actually grassroots understanding. So we've got to build those links.
Yeah, and I'd love to help, like any way I can, definitely 100%. That's
great, thanks. And now I'm conscious in some of what Paul was talking about, he was really talking about the nighttime economy as well, which, you know, let's thinking about how many people actually work in that sector. It's not just, you know, it's a miss of us to actually think of that as just a cultural offer. It's actually an amazing contributor to economic well-being, where people have employment. You know, it's a significant contributor to the number of people employed in a nighttime economy now. You know, this is a 24/7 city that doesn't stop if we're talking from a London perspective. So when we sort of think about that, Julian, can I ask you, you know, what do you think we should be doing potentially more of, and collaborating with who to try and make sure that our nighttime economy is one that keeps people both local and competes on the London area? If he's on mute.
I'm unmuted now. So I don't think we can ignore COVID at the moment, and clearly, you know, that nightlife, hospitality, cultural industry and offer is the most vulnerable to COVID and any second kind of lockdown or limits that we've got. And there's lots of debate about whether the 10 o'clock closure is helping or hindering the kind of COVID safety messages. So first of all, you know, council is doing absolutely everything to support those businesses in terms of making them COVID safe, also lobbying on their behalf that if we did go into further tougher restrictions because of COVID getting worse, that we have a proper compensation package for those businesses, because, you know, they are desperate at the moment and they're really struggling. And so we need to kind of give them everything that we can in terms of support. In terms of kind of more long-term responses that we can make, clearly, we've got Crossrail coming, and yes, it will eventually come. And what we don't want is for Crossrail to take people out of Ealing and to other destinations. We want Ealing to be a destination that people can access and come into to enjoy our nightlife. Now, we've talked about our kind of music heritage, which is fantastic. Rolling Stones started at the Ealing Club, and we had a rather successful chap who went to Ealing Art College called Freddie Mercury. And what I would want is we've been talking about this and making progress on it, but we kind of want an Ealing Walk of Fame, and we've talked about for Southall a Bollywood Walk of Fame, so that we can actually make we hide all of these kind of historical things, like Jimi Hendrix going to Hanwell to get his amplifiers, and Deep Purple playing at Hanwell Community Centre. We don't talk about these things, and we really do need to kind of make ourselves an attraction. So these walks of fame ideas, I've got this idea of a kind of Freddie Mercury hologram in the middle of the Ealing kind of Filmworks development, so that we can really promote our history.
Thanks, Julian. I'm just conscious of time, so just before we wrap up the panel one discussion, I'm going to just quickly bounce to a question that I think Libby posed. And sorry, Libby, I'm squinting at a very small screen here, so I'm going to summarise very quickly. But with new investment coming in, how do we maintain good quality culture and local connectivity without losing it? And conscious that some big developments, and we heard the example Jamal gave of the working club. So I don't know if that's true or false, but so some context around, with big development come some losers, and some of those actually they offer variety, they offer diversity. Could I just let's put it to both Davina and Paul around what can we do strategically, Paul, and Davina, what from a developer's perspective can we do to make sure that we preserve what is the best of a borough, and don't lose that at the expense of larger development. And if I start with Paul first, maybe, and conscious of time, so Paul, if we could do a minute answer, that'd be great.
We've seen in Waltham Forest, in Lewisham, in a number of different boroughs where you've got people on the ground in the community, and you start with those people, you get that grassroots up success. And whether that's people who decide they want to put on a cinema, create a late night food market, do performances in cafes, whatever it is, starting at that grassroots level, using those people in the council, using those people in the community, using money in the council to invest in them. So in the Waltham Forest pilot area, nighttime zone, they actually paid an arts organisation to do that local community surveying, to really understand what was happening in their high street at night. So it's tipping things on its head a little bit, but really starting at the grassroots, talk to the people at the front line, get the community involved.
Right. And Davina, what do you think from a developer's perspective?
I completely agree with Paul that it is all to do with engaging the community and understanding what's important for the community ahead of any plans being drawn up. So it's about that consultations from day one of being selected as the preferred developer for an area, and really deciding what's the priorities. And then throughout the entire regeneration, it's about liaising with them to ensure the plans are developing in accordance with what the local community want, and that any cultural aspects are not forgotten. And I apologise, I don't know the details of the Working Man's Club. But yeah, it is all about community consultation to ensure that the best continues for the long term.
Great. Thank you all from panel one. Please stay around with us for the conversation, because actually we're just taking a very small journey down the virtual road from Ealing Borough's perspective. And we're going to pick up some of the conversation now sort of around Ealing and West Ealing and Hanwell. And recognising, Julian introduced us right at the beginning with Pitshanger Manor being one of the successes in recent years of seeing something brought back into use and really increasing the diversity of our offer, particularly from the art perspective rather than performance arts. But let's sort of, in that context, think around what we can learn from there. If I can start maybe by asking Lucy. So let me just briefly introduce the panel for those of you that don't know. We've got for panel two, Claire Goff, who's the director of Pitshanger Manor and Gallery, Eve Blade, who's the operations manager for Creative and Land Trust, June Martin, who's the co-founder of the Hanwell Hootie, and Lucy, where I'm going to start, Lucy Doe, who's the chief executive of the Dodo Micro Pub Company. So Lucy, as a local business owner, what impact do arts and culture have on activating the place? And how does that create a space for you to have a thriving business? Could you start that conversation off for me, please?
Yeah, of course. So for us, we are a community-focused pub, and culture plays a massive part in what we do. Like, our culture is the people that come into the pub. We're not just the pub that shifts beer and some snacks. We literally are there to enable community. So to be able to, COVID obviously has a massive effect on my business as a small business. It's a micro pub. We currently can have 18 people in our space, and that obviously is not a viable business. If you want real heart businesses to remain in your local areas, you need to be able to have other businesses like Pitshanger to support businesses like mine that can create the community aspect of what we're about in a much bigger space, bringing along other small businesses with us, bringing along the essence of Hanwell, so the Hanwell Hootie as well. So for us, culture is important because it's essentially our entire business. People are our culture, and we need support of other options in the borough to be able to support the tiny businesses that are really struggling this year.
Thanks for that, Lucy. Now I'm going to jump around on the question, so for the panelists, I apologise. But Claire, I think that's I'm really conscious, having experienced it myself recently, some of the synergies and some of the connections that you've been making from a Pitshanger Manor perspective in terms of your outreach to supporting small businesses. And Lucy's an example of a business you've worked with really recently. So how can people like you as leaders from an Ealing culture perspective use your reach to make sure that our smaller and our more diverse offers, like Lucy's, can survive the present COVID crisis? Do you want to sort of talk about how you see your role and what you can do to help activate?
Sure, yes, thank you. Pitshanger really wants to work with local community businesses and local community organisations. So I think both Julian and Jamal were talking before about Bolo, and youth centres like that are very much organisations that we want to work with. It was fantastic to work with Lucy and the Dodo recently, and they did a pop-up in our restaurant. We're really keen on exploring all sorts of different ways in which we can do collaborations like that to help local businesses, to showcase local businesses, bring them in, maybe to have a few stalls in the front of Pitshanger. So it's something we're very much exploring at the moment, how we can make our premises and our community and sort of the work that we can give people through Pitshanger and the range of exhibitions and so on that we offer there, to expand it to supporting and working with local businesses, whether they be pubs, cafes, or other organisations, flower shops, whatever.
Thanks, Claire. Just to sort of pick up there, because it's, sorry if you sort of, I think you inferred it there, but obviously it's not just about the benefits to the likes of Lucy and some of the smaller offers. Do you want to just talk about what the benefit was also to Pitshanger? Because I think, we want to encourage some of the larger players in this conversation, say to hear your feedback on how that's benefited you as a larger player, really might help persuade other people to join in that sort of space.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, the benefit from doing something like a pop-up with Lucy is enormous, because Pitshanger, just like every other organisation, has suffered during COVID. So we lost our caterers during COVID, so our restaurant was closed. So it was absolutely wonderful for our opening weekend for us to have Lucy and her partners that she set up, the food operators and so on, come in and re-energize Pitsanger, so that we had a catering offer for our visitors when they came through. And it's all part of making the site, in this sort of slightly strange time post-COVID, when we can't have quite as many visitors coming through as before, but still making it feel animated, welcoming. And it picks up on something else that we were sort of touching on before, is how we make all these places attractive and accessible to everybody. And one of the things we're very conscious of at Pitsanger is, as with every art museum in the world, there's always a slight barrier to coming over the threshold to people who don't traditionally think of themselves as art lovers. And we try very, very hard at Pitsanger to design our exhibitions so that they are really accessible, fun to be in, engaging, using contemporary artists and modern media that will make them fun and interesting. But people sometimes don't realise that until they've crossed the threshold. And so having a collaboration with something like Lucy and the Dodo helps bring a new audience to us. And we hope when they go for a lovely pint at the Dodo at Pitsanger, they also then cross the threshold and come into our Hogarth exhibition and actually find there's something really exciting for them there. So it's a sort of win-win. It's a really positive collaboration. We hope for partners that we're working with, but also definitely for Pitsanger too.
Thanks, Claire. And I think that one of the things in the collaboration that we saw a few weeks ago was also the role of live performance and music, which really is struggling in the present COVID time. So, Jean, can I bring you in to this part of the conversation and say, what role can artists play in this space? And then in terms of taking that to the next level, what would you like to see us collectively do to try and support artists to achieve that? So sort of part one, what can artists contribute? And part two, what would you like to see us do so that that could be realised?
Well, I think initially everybody likes a performance. So at a base level, artists offering out their services and their performance, which is very important to them at the moment, but it's very important for our community to experience music, art and culture. I think that artists we know are inspiring. We've got tons of young and emerging talent in Ealing, and we want to make sure that young and emerging talent is exposed to that. And as we move forward, when we talk about sort of Paul talked earlier on about sort of partnerships in music and businesses. The Hootie was built on partnerships in music and businesses, and that's really, really important to support business and to support performances. One of the things we talked about were vibrant spaces, and Davina spoke about working hubs. And I think to have a long-term effect on our art and culture and music, we need to think about those hubs slightly different as the high street changes. So when we look at potentially the new developments that come to Ealing, I'd like to see developers look at that in a different way and maybe offer performance spaces instead of the traditional retail offering. Also offer artistic hubs. So maybe you have a jeweler with a sculpture, with a fine art painter. So to actually look at what the high street looks like, because it is changing and it is different. And but I think that they have a lot to offer, and it is about inspiring, it is about role models, it is about having a base there that young and inspiring can look at and performance.
Thanks, Jean. And so I guess that really links us neatly into Eve. If I can come to you and say, obviously, placemaking is vital in terms of creating both employment, leisure, supporting the businesses that are dependent on those. These aren't things that exist on their own. The entities that are reliant on supply chains and other businesses, and they support other businesses. So thinking about that, what could we learn from London and other European centres to try and create those hubs that could thrive? And what examples might you give us around creating placemaking for sort of low income communities and diverse communities, so that we can make sure that the offer isn't a polarized one and really does represent a borough of cultures?
Yeah, thank you. I think what June said just a minute ago really helps summarize it, actually. It's really about trying to create places that reflect what's going on in our local community. There's lots of interesting examples where in boroughs around London, we've seen, for instance, in Waltham Forest, where workspaces have been created to like an open resource for carpentry and woodworking on the edge of a residential estate, which allows local people to come and sort of experiment and use these kind of materials and resources for the first time, potentially. And I think one of the big things to think about in the council and also as developers is trying to make places that are really inclusive. So you're not just creating a residential space like Davina was talking about earlier. It's really about thinking about what the community needs and trying to create really genuine places that offer opportunity, whether that be from Southall to Acton, thinking about what those people need in those communities and trying to reflect that. So artist studios could be anything from music studios to set design to jewelry making, and those hubs are really important. If you can have those people collaborating and working together through the use of new affordable workspaces, truly affordable workspaces, you're going to create something that's much more. There'll be an offer to people who maybe before never had it. And I think that idea of collaboration and creating new opportunity through actually real affordable workspace is key in this.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Can I just say to a couple of people that have put some comments in the question and answer bar, Libby and Annie, I'd really sorry, because I'm working on a phone, it's really small, so I can't see it. So I'm not ignoring what you've got to say. But if you want to try and phrase anything as a question, I'd really like to try and put it to the panel. But my apologies, it's too small for me to read quickly and turn it into a question. So I'm really keen to make sure that we take your comments on board or put the questions to the panel if you got them. And my apologies if I'm not doing you good service. I'm afraid my technology this morning's let us down and I'm working on a very small screen. So just to say to people that are listening, because obviously your contribution is really important if in a post-COVID world we're going to really learn and take the best of what we can do collectively together. So Eve, thank you for those examples. That was really useful for us to hear of some of those examples. Now, some of those examples aren't just around town centres. That's about some of our broader borough-based thinking around where those opportunities could be. So can I go back to Claire very quickly and just sort of say, Claire, obviously you're a very town centric based activity. How might Pitshanger as the manor and the gallery take that reach beyond? And what would you like to see as a borough do to support you if you were to be in that leadership space? Picking up some of those challenges that Eve said around, creating different spaces. Obviously, you've got a fantastic space in the heart of Ealing, but of course, your reach has the potential to go much further. So what would you like to see us do as a borough to support that?
Well, two things. One, we are very important to our objectives is our outreach programme to take Pitshanger particularly to local schools, but also to local community groups and so on. And the borough is already, but help in making sure we reach those schools, and particularly important now that schools are less comfortable about coming to visit us. We are working on programmes to make sure we can take more to them. I think there's an awful lot. I mean, it's very interesting what Jamal said at the beginning, that he had studied next door to Pitshanger, but he'd never been inside it. And I think something we're working really, really hard on at the moment is trying to break down, as I say, the barriers so that Pitshanger becomes a real resource for everybody in the borough, regardless of how much you're used to going to museums and galleries or not. And one thing I think that we've got a real opportunity for is first picking up on what Paul was saying about collaborations between all the arts organisations across the borough, making sure we're using our spaces for them, but mutually promoting each other. So I think there's a real opportunity for that. The second thing is, I think, going back to Crossrail and that transport hub, is recognising that we want to be drawing people into Ealing and letting them know what the cultural offer is in Ealing. So can we take examples from what's been done in other transport hubs where, for instance, in Charing Cross, where they identify the National Gallery and the National Portrait Gallery, can we do a similar thing? We're rebuilding Ealing Broadway Station at the moment. Is there something we can do to really highlight these elements of the borough that we're so proud of, to make sure that people know about them and know to come into them?
Thanks, Claire. And I'm going to take a slightly left turn now. And Jean, I'm going to pop back to you, if I can, in terms of, you co-founded one of the largest free music festivals, I think, in Europe. It's based on local talent and local people. And that really shows what grassroots, I want to say a grassroots movement actually can achieve by listening and by thinking about that offer. But obviously through that, you've learned an awful lot around, or should I say, probably not learned, but you've learned how to overcome things, but you've encountered a number of barriers. What would you say is the one or two barriers you would really like developers and local authorities and strategists to really think about? What would your challenge be to all of us in a space of trying to make sure that culture isn't dampened out, but actually has the opportunity to thrive in a way that you've learned to be able to make it happen locally?
I think fundamentally it's the community. So as you say, Hanwell Hootie was built on community, and we utilize the people and the skills within the community. So I guess listening more to to people when they want to develop projects. I think sometimes people don't jump onto the bandwagon until success is already rolling. So I suppose really I would like developers and organisations and councils to listen a little bit earlier down the road. I mean, we'll always talk about funding until we're all blue in the face saying we need more funding. That's obvious. All arts and cultural organisations do need that. We're very well supported actually in Ealing around the different areas of the festival, and we have been, and I do feel that's not to blow Ealing's trumpet because I don't want to do that, but we have actually been supported in many different ways to get where we are today. But I think that we have to roll forward. We do have more international artists, and I think that again we need to be looking at who we're getting in and how we're getting in, and what can we do to market that for the borough.
Thanks, Jean. And I guess just trying to take that sort of 180 turn. Of course, Hanwell Hootie is a massive. It doesn't matter what we say about it's the largest music festival. It's a massive economic vitamin boost for Hanwell in the West Ealing community. And yeah. Lucy, maybe if I come to you and just sort of say, do you want to just reflect on what the benefits of having that infrastructure or that structure around you brings to you as a small and local business, and how important that is to your sort of annual success, maybe?
Yeah, of course. So without the Hanwell Hootie, Hanwell as a town centre would never have the amount of people that come to visit it. And it is always the highlight of our year, not just from a fun, really good vibes perspective, but also from a monetary perspective. It's as a hospitality business, sometimes you need that one single month from a boost with a collaboration like Hanwell Hootie or with Pithanger Manor to make your year work. And that's just how hospitality businesses run. So I'm not blowing smoke up the Hanwell Hootie bum, but it's definitely a highlight that we need financially, physically and emotionally as a business, as a small tiny business in a quirky little small tiny town on the edge of West London.
Thank you for that. So can I thank all of the panelists for panel 2? Your contributions have been really great in terms of talking about both outreach, the art of the possible, and some of the lessons that we've all learned. And I think it's really important now more than ever that we make sure that we take all of that learning forward, because COVID, obviously, doesn't matter what we say, this virtual forum is a good example of how the world is rapidly changing, and our need to adapt in these spaces really quickly so that we can make sure that business is supported. Obviously, it's great for digital arts and digital business, but of course, there is much more to that diverse offer and those groups that we rely on it, both from a faith or a cultural perspective and from an arts and interest perspective. So just to sort of close off the conversation, I guess, for this morning's session, and thanks to everyone who contributes, because there are so many borough groups contributing to this picture. And the people that we've had speaking this morning are just examples of those things that are happening. So let's not lose sight of the variety that's there. But how do we create a place which is a place of choice? And for all boroughs, everyone needs to be thinking of this question. COVID is teaching us that people don't necessarily want to travel. People are discovering in their communities things that they didn't really know were on their doorstep because they're staying local. They're shopping local. How do we make sure that we don't lose what has been good in the COVID crisis, I guess, is my question, to make sure that places can connect more with their communities and that arts can continue to thrive. And so maybe if I'm going to do a quick round robin, please, for people just to give me their sort of closing thoughts, maybe in that context around what we can do. And Eve, can I start with you? Please, maybe start us off.
Yeah, thank you. I think the real task here is to think early. Working together, developers, councils, businesses, thinking at pre-planning stage at how to get activation really happening really affordably, because if you can build in the affordability in a master plan or a development plan before it even goes into planning, that's when you get the real benefit. And really thinking about culture, not just as an aside, but as absolute infrastructure in the thinking. We at Creative Land Trust are an organization who are looking at the long term. So opportunities of 25 years and up to try and bring in affordable studio and artist workspace into town centres and boroughs across London. And so working with developers at those early stages is absolutely crucial, and with councils, of course.
Great, thank you. Jean?
Yeah, I think what Eve has just said there, we need to capture right now what we have. And I think for me, a vibrant space or a place that's interesting to stay local is a place that's vibrant all day. So it's not just about the event popping up once a week. It's about having real artistic hubs, working, living, breathing hubs that we can utilize during the day, and then we can go in the evening, have a great nighttime economy. But we need to be capturing that now with the developments that are coming forward.
That's great. So talking of developments then, maybe let's jump across to Davina.
Hi. I think it's really important in large-scale regeneration, for instance, South Acton, where you have so many new residents coming into an area, kind of unprecedented number, that we really give the opportunity for the old residents and the new residents to meet. And so you form a community, and that community can then evolve and become creative. But if you don't give the opportunity for these residents to meet and socialize and form a true bond, the creativity is never going to happen because people are going to stay in their apartments. So it's about creating that external space for the community to thrive. And yes, the developers definitely need to start that organically, but then it needs to continue a long time after the development is finished.
Thank you. So if we're talking long term in that stimulus, Claire, maybe you want to give us your final thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say that you were talking about benefits that we've had as a result indirectly from lockdown. I think the one for us that we're really focusing on is all those people who used to be commuting into central London, who are now staying in Ealing, and for us working out how we can really work on developing our local audience who might be able to nip out during the day for a bit of light breather from their work or after school immediately after. So working on that. And I think I'd like to come back to this thing about how we as a community collaborate and building the infrastructure that enables us to collaborate and that enables for example, me to work with Lucy and find out that Lucy is available to do something, and sort of the council support to facilitate that cross support, collaboration, promotion by all the different arts organisations and local businesses.
Thanks, Claire. So you're an example of a collaborator. What's your final comments, please? Lucy, sorry.
Final thoughts for me, yeah, collaboration, and I would say community is key to whatever happens development-wise and borough-wide, and kind of creating partnerships and listening to the communities that already exist will help new things thrive.
And Paul, sort of taking all of that in context, going right back to where we probably sort of started the conversation this morning, from that strategic perspective, is there anything you'd sort of like to emphasise coming back from what people are saying from their perspectives?
Yeah, I would. I mean, first of all, I'd like to just say there's no such thing as the nighttime economy. We talk about this a lot, but actually there's just the economy. Pubs don't open at 7 o'clock at night. They're open all day. Even nightclubs are doing stuff in the daytime, renting themselves out for different things these days. There is the economy, and there's bits of that happen at night and bits that happen in the day. So let's take that full 360-degree view of what's possible at night. Let's not restrict ourselves to just what we've thought of in the past as the nighttime economy, and then let's plan for it. So crucial thing is to have a plan. What do you want to see? What is the vision for the area at night, actually around the clock, to be honest? Building that into your town centre plans, having a nighttime strategy, and picking up on something that June mentioned. How do you want to see spaces used around the clock? So how can a space that is generally closed in the evening suddenly be brought into life and shared? So you might have 2 different or even 3 or 4 different businesses sharing the same space, but sharing it out around the clock, for example. And we're seeing examples of that happening around London. And then I suppose the final point for me is about being joined up, and you touched on it, Mark, earlier. Actually, the licensing team and the environmental health team in the council are as important as the culture team, the economic development team, the regeneration team and the planning team. They all need to work together, especially in the context of recovery from the pandemic.
Thanks, Paul. Lots of teams that I touch on daily, so absolutely important that they all play their part. So let me just finish by saying thank you to all of our panelists, and I'll give the last two segments. We've got two last speakers where we started at the beginning with Julian and Jamal. Jamal, maybe if you want to just give us your reflections on what you would like to see or what you think the potential for the future is. And then Julian, if you perhaps want to just give some closing reflections from an Ealing perspective. Jamal?
So yeah, like I love the idea of like celebrating more about Ealing, like Julian's idea about that. I agree with Eve's in terms of like pre-planning is like so important. Like Davinia's point on connecting the two, everyone's raised valid points, but connecting the two communities together, I think that's so important. And one of the things in lockdown that I've realized is it has brought the community quite closer together. Like I'm in like 3 acting WhatsApp groups, so random, like I meet up with them, like I've never met like from people from all different backgrounds. And I do that so I can connect and hear what other people are saying, so I can feedback to what's going on. Like I was at Acton's New Market on Saturday, and someone came up to me and was like, "Oh, you're in the group," and it was just like everyone's like, "How do you?" Like it was just so far apart, but like because we're from Acton, we were connected. And I think like the most important thing is like we have to get in earlier. Like everyone says, like consulting like at a late point is just useless. Like what change are you gonna have in that? And I've seen it where they'll put like leaflets up, but it won't really connect to the community to actually ask them what's going on, and won't put it in places where people will see it. And that's what that's like a fight. I'm not a fight, but I'm doing that at the moment with Catalyst, because obviously Friary Park, where I grew up, is getting redeveloped, and I'm like, there needs to be a community centre there. There needs to be this. There needs to be this. And obviously, if I wasn't there, I don't know who would be doing that. Like, and it would just get pushed to the side, and in 10 years' time, it will be launched, and there won't be anything. Like, it's just crazy. So I think like transparency and accountability, I said it again, accountability for what like actual action points of like having this conversation. I think this conversation is great, but like what are the action points after to actually make sure that it's actually going to be followed through, which is so so important. But I'm very grateful to be on. Sorry, I'm talking loads. I'm very grateful to be on.
No, thanks, Jamal. I'm really conscious that we're just about to tip over on time.
Right.
So, Julian, if you might just like to give some final thoughts.
Yeah, just very quickly. Yeah. So brilliant that we've got so many people on this call who are proactive, collaborating. Yeah, we can be a facilitator as the council. But I think, the future's bright, even notwithstanding COVID, given all the positive people on this call.
Thanks, Julian. And I think for me, the one thing that the one thing that I'm taking away, and I'm hearing lots from everyone across all the sections, is actually that difference between consultation and engagement. And I really think it's important on all of us to do that engagement, that listening. I always remember my mum saying to me, "You've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in that ratio." And I think sometimes consultation can be seen to get that in reverse. So I think one of the key things around making sure that we build these opportunities going forward is that we really up the engagement processes around this, so that we're listening to the communities and what people need, as opposed to making an assumption that potentially other people know better. So can I thank absolutely everyone on the panel. It's been my pleasure this morning to guide us through the conversation. It's been really interesting from my perspective to think about what the challenges are ahead. Annie, Libby, I'm really conscious that I haven't got to your questions and I've not done you justice with those. But can I just say, for those of you that are local, we certainly will pick up this conversation, and I will make sure that we reach out to you before the end of the week, because what you've got to say when I say we need to be listening is really important. So I'll make sure that we follow that up for those of you that are part of the local conversation. And for those of you that want a more broader strategic conversation, of course, I'm really happy that we contribute towards that dialogue as well. So thank you very much. My poor chairmanship has got us 2 minutes over, so I'll hand us back to Bonnie.
Thanks, Mark. No worries at all about the time. And that was such an interesting discussion. It was great to hear so many different voices represented, and really appreciate Ealing and London bringing that conversation together. It was refreshing and different, and raised some really interesting points about community and collaboration, particularly at the moment, as Jamal mentioned, that is more important than ever going forward. So thank you all again for speaking. Thank you to Mark for chairing, and to the audience, just a couple of notes on what's up next as part of Real Estate Live. We've got a panel discussing promoting business districts in the City of London coming up immediately now, and after that we've got a panel on Crawley this afternoon, another panel looking at the UK Innovation Corridor, and a lot more going on tomorrow. So check out the Real Estate Live website to find out more details about those, and obviously have a look at the Ealing and London website for more details about the events that they've got coming up, and more information on their programme of activity. So thank you all for joining, and we'll hope to see you all again soon.